Welcome to the Animal Training Academy podcast show. I'm your host, Ryan Cartlidge. I know that you're here because you want to master your animal training skills using a force-free approach. And to handle the variety of challenges you face, you need a broad knowledge and experience base. The problem is, we all get stuck and hit rough patches in our training, which can leave us feeling overwhelmed and helpless. Our mission since 2015 is to empower trainers just like you. The Animal Training Academy has helped thousands of trainers globally to develop skills, gain confidence, and positively influence both animal and human learners. Here's how we can do the same for you. Sign up for our membership waitlist at www.atamember.com. Register when our doors open email arrives and start growing your training skills. Build impactful training practices benefiting you and those you train. So join the waitlist at www.atamember.com. And while waiting, enjoy this free podcast show. We want to see you avoid embarrassment, overwhelm, and burnout. Instead, we want to see you build resilience to setbacks, get more organized, and grow your training skills and knowledge. In short, we want to see you enjoy confidence in yourself as a trainer and lead a fulfilling life, positively impacting the lives of the animal and human learners you work with. But we will start today's episode where we will be talking to one Jessica Dolce. Jessica is a certified compassion fatigue educator, receiving her training from Attend Academy. She brings 20 years of experience working with and for animals to the Compassion and Balance program, her online education platform supporting the well-being of animal welfare professionals. Jessica is an instructor at the Shelter Medicine program at the University of Florida. And she has worked with organisations worldwide such as the IAABC, National Wildlife Rehabilitators Association, Two Green Threads, HSUS, Animals Asia, and the ASPCA. Jessica holds a Master of Science in Adult and Higher Education degree and certificates in mindfulness facilitation, positive psychology, coaching, and mental health first aid. She lives in Maine with her husband, dogs, cats, and ducks. So without further ado, it's my very great pleasure to welcome Jessica to the show today, who's patiently waiting by in Maine. Jessica, thank you so much for taking the time to come and hang out with us at Animal Training Academy.
I'm really happy to be here, Ryan. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you're very welcome. And I said to you when we connected pre-Christmas that I've been wanting to get your name, I was going to say on the podcast, get you, not just your name. Doesn't make sense, does it? Get you on the podcast. And shout out to one of our members, Nina Harland, who you recently were a guest, I believe, on her platform. And she shared about that event in our members Facebook group. And I was like, oh yeah, Jessica. And that led to this. So ripples. Thank you, Nina, if you're listening.
Thank you, Nina.
Well, let's dive straight in, Jessica. For this one, to get started, I was hoping that you could please take the listeners back and share with us about your journey, your odyssey, where you first got started with the work you're currently doing, and where you got started working with animal care professionals.
Yeah, so I think it's probably helpful to start at the beginning. I've been a compassion fatigue educator for a little over 10 years, but that work is so rooted in my work with animals that it makes sense to back it all the way up to the beginning. So I started my career with animals more than 20 years ago when I lived in Philadelphia, and I started my own dog walking and pet sitting company. And so for about 5 years, I was self-employed full-time, doing, work that I always think is similar to dog training in the sense that it's client-based work. And so I'm in their home, have a very intimate relationship with people and their pets. And at the same time, I was volunteering in the shelter system in Philadelphia, doing lots of different things. So my experience in animal sheltering at that point was as a volunteer. And then at the end of 2007, I moved up here to Maine, where I live now, and started working full time in an animal shelter with the dogs. And while doing that work, like many animal shelter workers, I had to have a second job to pay the bills. And I thought it would be a good idea to start another project because we have all these aspirations to change the world. And so my coworker and I co-founded a small nonprofit that offered support for people who lived with pit bulls, so pet owner support work. And he was a dog trainer, and I was more of a humane educator at the time. And so we did many things, but one of the things that we did was we offered free weekly dog training classes for people who had pit bulls. And we were doing that because as shelter workers, we were just seeing so many pit bulls come into the shelter because of things like reactivity, leash issues, stuff that really we felt like if we could support the families, before they got to the point where they needed to surrender their pet, maybe we could keep pit bulls out of the shelter system. And so that was the idea. And so we were doing that work. And working full time at the shelter, having a part-time job to pay the bills, and on the side doing like free education and free dog training classes. It's probably not shocking to anybody that I was not okay. So I had definitely experienced burnout as a dog walker, a self-employed dog walker. And we can kind of talk about all this, in a little bit. It wasn't until I worked at the shelter that I experienced compassion fatigue and secondary traumatic stress. And I was experiencing burnout because I was so overextended. And so after a few years of that, I had to make some hard decisions for my own health, mentally, physically, emotionally, financially, all of those things, to leave the shelter and eventually leave the group that I had helped to co-found. Then I went back to walking dogs. I specialized in reactive dogs, specifically, again, trying to support the animals that were in my community where people were really struggling and trying to make life easier for them, the owners. And around that same time, I was writing a blog called Notes from a Dog Walker. And that accidentally led to me creating something called Dogs in Need of Space. Dinos, this is old. Most people probably don't remember it, but it was really kind of my unintentional support group for people who lived with dogs who needed space from other dogs or people. So maybe reactive, aggressive, fearful dogs, but also service dogs or dogs with illnesses or injury. And it kind of just continued this trend or through line in all of the work I was doing, where I continued to support the pet owner, the person who was struggling to make things work with their dog, who they loved, but they were really stressed by and often, at a really precarious point in their relationship with their dog, where if someone didn't help them, that dog was going to the shelter, or other things. And so I was working as a dog walker again. I was doing this kind of dogs in need of space project on the side. I was working for a national animal welfare group that did pit bull specific work around breed specific legislation. And around that time, I was really reflecting on my experience in the shelter and trying to understand why I had kind of just bottomed out. Where did I go wrong? It was really hard for me to understand why I had struggled so much when I was at the shelter and I was having a hard time, and really a hard time. And I would ask my coworkers who had been doing the work for a long time how they were able to keep going. How do you handle this? How do you keep doing the work? The answer was often Prozac. Like that's what their answer would be to me. Like we just take medication. That's how we get through it. So imagine this is like 2008, 2009. There was not a lot of conversation around compassion fatigue. There was, it just wasn't widely available, particularly for low level animal shelter workers making minimum wage who could not travel to conferences to get that type of specialized education. And there were no resources offered within my workplace at all around stress, burnout, compassion fatigue. And so I just really started to think it was me. Like, I guess something is really wrong with me and I'm not tough enough or strong enough for this work. And I left. And in those years of kind of going back to dog walking and all that kind of stuff, I just had time to try to figure out um, where I felt I had gone wrong. And that's where I finally stumbled on compassion fatigue resources. And it was like a light bulb, went off, this moment of recognition where I saw myself so clearly in a way that I had never been able to understand my experience before. I should always say this. I feel like it's important for me to say this. Both of my parents are therapists. So it's not like I wasn't familiar with mental health issues or that I felt uncomfortable around mental health or my emotions. I was like pretty savvy, and still, this was really a foreign concept to me. And once I started to understand what I had been experiencing, it changed the way I was relating to myself and these, symptoms and issues. And that allowed me to take more effective steps to help myself and recover and take care of myself. And that was fine and well and good. But I looked around and all of my friends work with animals as dog trainers, as animal control officers, vet techs, if whatever it is, like they're right there. And I thought, oh, none of my friends have access to any of the resources that have been so helpful for me. So around like 2012, I think it was 2013, somewhere around there, I went and got, some training to become a certified compassion fatigue educator, which is kind of like a flimsy certificate. It's a lot like how anyone can call themselves a dog trainer. Anyone can call themselves a certified compassion fatigue educator. But that got me started. And then I went back to school. I got my master's in adult education. And I put together a really simple course, compassion fatigue course, just for animal care workers. And I put that out, I think, in 2013 for the first time, really with the intention of I just wanted to offer affordable online information for, in particular, animal shelter workers that I knew couldn't afford anything else. So I just thought, at a minimum, let me help this way. Kind of the same way with dogs in need of space. Like, let me just put out some information to help people who are struggling feel less alone, less overwhelmed, less clueless about what's happening to them and their dog. Same idea. And what happened was there was a huge response to it. And like almost immediately, I got tapped by the University of Florida to build a course for them, which I still teach to this day, called Compassion Fatigue Strategies Plus. And within a couple of years, by 2017, I was doing this work full time. So I quit all of my other jobs. And I still actually do a little bit of dog walking because I can't give it up. It's part of who I am, I think. But I really began doing this work full time. And since then, I have worked with hundreds of animal shelters and animal welfare groups, doing education, whether that's webinars or online courses or one-to-one coaching with people. And it's really become my full-time work and what I specialize in. And it's been a really interesting journey. But for me, the through line of all of this, from being a dog walker 20 years ago to being a compassion fatigue educator now, is really trying to support people while they're often doing difficult things and feeling really alone, and making sure that no one feels as clueless and alone and overwhelmed as I did when I was struggling. And so that's it. That's the long answer of where I started and where I am now.
Well, thank you for sharing all of that. I was as I always am when I record a podcast. It's 9 a.m. here for me in New Zealand, but it's 2 p.m. in Maine for Jessica. Around 3 p.m. She says. I was excited this morning because I love doing these podcasts. I love getting on the mic and learning about someone's story and getting to know someone really deep. And so we really appreciate, speaking on behalf of the listeners, when people share their stories and get a little bit personal with us. It doesn't surprise me hearing your story that there was a huge response to this. As you said earlier, your aspirations were to change the world. And you can't see Jessica, but she's laughing. But I say that, and I specifically and intentionally bring that up because I believe to my core that the aspirations of the listeners of this podcast show are to change the world. This is why we're doing this. We want to have our biggest possible positive impact on all of the animals and humans that we work with. And we go work in the shelter, or we go walk the dogs, or we go to people's houses and train. And the aspirations we have and that identity, that aspirational identity, doesn't always match life. Life gets lifey. Thank you, Emily Johnson Bay, for that saying. Life gets lifey. And you said there that you remember you found these resources on compassion fatigue, and for the first time you feel like you could some of the fog was lifted, and you could more clearly see what was happening to you. You started to find some answers to the questions that you were asking about what were you doing wrong. I remember my first time I heard about compassion fatigue at the ASZK, Australasian Society of Zookeeping Conference in Tasmania in 2016. Clancy Hall, shout out to you, who did a 15-minute talk on compassion fatigue. Never heard about it before, but I had a very similar experience where I was like, oh, that's what this is.
Oh. Yeah. I call it, am I allowed to curse on your podcast? I don't know how.
Yeah, I mark the episode as explicit. So
Okay.
that's
To
totally
me, it's
fine.
the oh shit moment, right?
Oh, shit.
There's a oh shit. Like,
Yeah.
and that's how a lot of people tell me it feels when they first hear me explain what it is and what the symptoms are. It's a big oh shit moment that feels kind of good to see yourself clearly, but also it's like, oh no.
Yeah, terrifying.
Yeah.
Terrifying, because the thing is, like, to get to that stage where you go, oh shit, like we are doing behaviors, and we're doing behaviors because they're reinforced, otherwise we wouldn't be doing them. And so it's, oh shit, I've got this learning history now of behaviors, heavily reinforced behaviors that I know are not serving me, and now I have to learn new skills. I don't know what those new skills are, and now I have to like reevaluate my reinforcers. I don't even know I've understood compassion fatigue, but I still probably am confused about what my reinforcers are for these behaviors that are not serving me. Like that in itself would be overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
Like freeing, but overwhelming. And so there might be someone listening to this podcast episode, Jessica, who's sitting in their car right now. They're pulled over and they're going, oh shit. Or they
Welcome
just
to
dropped
the club.
or they just dropped their dish on the floor because they were like washing their plate. To help that listener and other listeners, because compassion fatigue is a construct, a label. What is? Can you offer a definition? What do you mean? And are you able to offer a definition from the literature? I don't know if there's like a literature wide general scientific consensus on that term, or is it a Jessica offering? Can you clarify that for us?
It's funny that you would say that, because there's no debate that helping professionals are impacted by the work that they do, but there's a huge amount of debate around the terminology and the definitions. And it's a really frustrating, like, academic fight that's been happening for 20 plus years. And so I use a definition that most resonates with me and the people that I work with. And so I'll give you that, and then I'll give you a couple of other definitions. So the definition I like to use for compassion fatigue is that it is a really profound physical, mental, emotional, spiritual depletion that is arising due to the demands of working in an intense caregiving environment in which the helper is feeling the pain, stress, and emotions of others. And over time, this causes a decline in our energy and ability to feel and care for others. So it's in the title, it's the fatigue of our compassion. The problem with that is in like the last 10 years, we now understand that compassion and empathy are two different things in terms of uh, the areas of our brain that are being activated when we experience these two different things. And so compassion fatigue is probably the wrong name for this. It's really empathy fatigue. That is what is fatiguing over time, because when we resonate with animals and people who are suffering or traumatized, stressed day after day, whenever we're resonating, we have that affective empathy, and we're feeling it with them. That's literally lighting up the pain center of our brain. And to be in pain all of the time is exhausting. That's what is really fatiguing. So there's even debate about that, whether compassion fatigue or empathy fatigue is the right terminology. I just tend to use compassion fatigue because it's what most people know. So I want, folks to understand what I'm talking about. But the idea here is that you don't get compassion fatigue or empathy fatigue because you don't care. You get it because at one point you cared very, very much, and you are so overextended, you're giving so much and feeling so much. And if you're not able to restore yourself, replenish yourself, recover, then you're coming back day after day in an increasingly depleted state. And empathy is really a finite resource. Like, we need to recover in order to be able to keep accessing it. And so over time, you find that your empathy, your sensitivity towards others, your hopefulness that you can make a difference, like your optimism, but it's really that empathetic connection starts to erode. Again, not because you don't care, but because you cared a lot and you're really worn out. And with folks who work with animals, the way we often will see empathy fatigue play out first, this isn't, a hard rule, but just generally speaking, we lose our empathy for other humans first. So, it's like the mantra, people suck, that we hear all the time. So we're losing empathy for our clients, for adopters or community members, for our coworkers, uh, and maybe also at home too. If we're experiencing compassion fatigue, due to our work, it doesn't just stay at work. It's with us all the time if we're experiencing it. So we might find that we don't have a lot of empathy for our partner, our kids, our own pets, ourselves. It's like, oh, you think you had a hard day? like, what I saw was so much worse today. So we don't have a lot of empathy even for people and animals that we love. And this also can play out in our connections with animals. So, we may find that we start to feel numb or detached from the animals that are our patients, our clients, the ones we're working with in shelters and zoos and aquariums, where we used to feel a real connection that was probably satisfying and meaningful. And now we're pretty numb and checked out. And to your point about reinforcing, I'm not a dog trainer. I want to make that really clear. So I'm probably going to use terminology incorrectly, but compassion fatigue is a way that we adapt and cope and protect ourselves, right? And so in the beginning, we disconnect, as compassion fatigue is kind of building, it can feel like we're behind a wall, that is trying to kind of keep everything out to protect us because we've felt a lot of pain. That empathy was really, overwhelming. We were suffering as we were bearing witness and caring for others who are suffering. And to protect ourselves, compassion fatigue makes a lot of sense. There's a real detached quality, a numb, disconnected, desensitized quality to compassion fatigue. and in little amounts. That can be really helpful. It's a really like adaptive way of coping. The problem is when we get stuck there, when it's not a conscious choice to disconnect as a protective measure, but it is an unconscious way of being. And that wall really prevents us from connecting in a way that we need to empathetically to do our jobs well, because we do need empathy to do our jobs well. So it's starting to impact the quality of the work that we do and also the quality of our lives, because compassion fatigue, that numbness, that crust that builds up on us protects us from the hard stuff, but there's no nuance to it. It keeps out everything. It's not just keeping out, that wall isn't just keeping out the bad, it's also keeping out all of the good. So we're not able to access a lot of joy or satisfaction and connection that we need in order to be well. And so it is something that starts off like, oh, I've noticed that if I detach or if I'm kind of numbed out or desensitized, I hurt less, right? But then we get stuck there because we're not really doing it in a conscious way or kind of an adaptive way. It's more maladaptive. So that is a long way of saying that compassion fatigue is kind of nuanced and there is no one definition. But I think it can be helpful to know that there are other things that you might be experiencing that are different. Things like secondary traumatic stress or burnout or even moral distress. And so, compassion fatigue is what we talk about the most because I think it's what people resonate with and we can get the conversation started. But depending on what stressors you are exposed to, you may or may not be experiencing compassion fatigue. It could be secondary traumatic stress or burnout or moral distress or some combination of all of those things, depending on, what you do and what's happening both at work and at home for you. And so that's a long way of saying it's complicated.
Yeah, I was surprised just then that when you was talking about profound physical, emotional, spiritual depletion from working in an intense caregiving environment, that made me tingly.
What made it tingly for you?
Maybe, I don't know. I think there must have been neurons firing in my brain that were connecting to a part of my past. This is a theory that I'm coming up with in the present moment. These are not well thought out thoughts, everybody.
My favorite kind of thoughts.
But then, as I'm sure all of our listeners, if not 95, 99% of listeners, they were pairing listening with you just then with their life, whether it was their past life, whether it was their current situation, or whether it was someone they know and someone they care about. So I was doing that as well. I am in an intense caregiving environment right now. We have an 8-week-old baby at home. and I looked at my wife yesterday, depleted of energy, depleted of sleep, giving Kaya everything she has. And I was thinking about the impact that has on her empathy for me, for our animals, for other human beings. So it was a nice reminder while I was listening to you then. So I'm not sure if that was related to the tingling. I'm not sure, but it was a meaningful and impactful definition for me. And the other dot you connected for me there, Jessica, was the wording you used. We need to recover in order to access empathy, and the importance of hobbies or weekends or some other way to mentally remove ourselves from that situation, which I think for a lot of listeners of this show is challenging. I say I think that, and feel free to interrupt me here at any time and bounce back to me what my feedback is making you think. I think to a speaking engagement I had last year where I talked about the importance of getting a hobby and the look on people's faces in the audience when they realized potentially they didn't have one that wasn't to do with dogs, or they felt guilty. Can you talk about that? People feel guilty for doing something that isn't to do with the animal care or maybe you're a social worker or a nurse or whatever it is, their caring role. Is that a thing?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's a big part of the conversations I have with people. So there's a whole rabbit hole we could go down around guilt and an overdeveloped sense of responsibility and boundaries and all of that. But to kind of put that on the back burner for a second, I think the important part, if like people are going to take away one thing, is that resilience is not possible without recovery. So resilience isn't just about, oh, I bounced back from something hard. It's I rested, I recovered, and then I was able to bounce back. And so recovery time is like non-negotiable if you want to be well, be working at a high effectiveness, really ethical, have your empathy, do it in a sustainable way. And so to me, it's critically important that you have a life outside of your work. And the activities can be whatever restores you. It doesn't, for some, I used to say you need to have a hobby that does not involve animals, something where you're not taking care of any other living being. You're just doing it for you. But I've had enough people say to me over the years, but riding horses is how I recover from working at the shelter and, that type of thing. So I get it. But there really does need to be some part of your life that's just for you, and you're not flexing that caregiver muscle, and you're having fun, or you're resting, rest, play. There's active and passive ways of recovering, but it's really critically important. And it's not selfish. There's no reason to feel guilty about it because it's literally taking care of your tools, right? As a trainer, your tools are your body and your brain and your emotions, right? So it's taking care of your tools so that you're coming back refilled, restored, recovered to, do another day. This is how, that cliche of, filling up your own cup, like that's hobbies, recovery time, non-work hours. That is how we refill our cup so we have something to give. Otherwise, we're just showing up, running on fumes, hoping those fumes can sustain others that are really struggling. And so it's a pretty fast way to get yourself in that bind of compassion fatigue of I'm exhausted, but the need never ends. And I have to keep giving. Like something's got to give. I can't keep functioning at that same level. Yeah. And so recovery, hobbies, these are not selfish things. It's really, I'll say it this way. The people I know who have worked in animal care, animal welfare, who have had long, successful careers, who have been able to reduce their experiences of burnout and compassion fatigue, who really are the people we want to be, almost always have a hobby. Like they always tell me about their hobby, and the hobby often has nothing to do with animals and nothing to do with other people who work with animals. So they have like a gardening club where they specialize in dahlias, or they whatever it is, they get to be a different person with those people, because everyone listening knows that if you show up anywhere, you tell people you work with animals, the next thing you know, you're giving dog training advice or whatever it is. You can't, turn it off. You're working all the time. So, or you're talking shop with other people who work with animals. So a lot of people really benefit from doing some sort of activity where they don't even touch on that part of their life, and they get to experience the fullness of being a human being that has other interests besides their work. That doesn't diminish your passion for the job, that you also really like to do Zumba, whatever it is. Like we're allowed to be multidimensional, and that is massively sustaining, to be able to turn that part of your brain off, to let the work stuff go for an hour on a regular basis, and just like lose yourself in a flower for a while. And again, like not selfish. Look, I'll say it maybe a couple of ways. You don't have to earn like that time off. Like you don't have to work hard. It doesn't have to, resting and recovering, having hobbies doesn't need to make you more productive in order to be worthwhile. Like that's our culture, that really messes with us by telling us like, oh, it's really great that you meditate because that will make you a better worker. Meditating is worth doing just for your experience meditating. Hobbies are worth doing just for the experience that you have when you're doing your hobby. But if it helps you to feel less guilty, if it helps you to get started doing these type of activities for yourself, then remember that it probably will make you more effective, more productive, and better at your work. It's not fundamentally, I think why we should be doing things like having fun or resting. I think we just inherently deserve to experience those things, whether or not it has a positive impact on our work, but it does have a positive impact on our work. So you don't have to, second guess yourself or, do somersaults in your head trying to justify why it's okay for you to have a life outside of work. It will support your professional life to go play in your off hours.
It's likely a great time to be recording this podcast, Jessica. I was just thinking because it's that time of year when people come back from a holiday or a break and they're like, yeah, and they come back with energy pretty quickly. Their email list becomes a little bit overwhelming and they slide back into that. But it's that feeling trying to encapsulate. This is what I was thinking when you were talking just then. You're trying to encapsulate and bottle that feeling that you have this time of the year. We're recording this on the 12th of January in New Zealand, and even for you, Jessica, when you come back to your desk or you get back into your car to go to a client's house and you've been off for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, whatever it is, over Christmas, and you've spent time with family and friends and you've managed to detach, but having that throughout the year, ideally on a weekly basis.
Yes. Yeah. You're literally restoring yourself by having fun, seeing your friends, being out in nature, doing whatever you find really enjoyable or very restful or connecting. Like these things are what give us energy. So I think partially like what's helpful to differentiate, or it was helpful for me to understand the difference between active and passive rest. So I think particularly when you're feeling really exhausted, and this might be burnout, by the way, too, where like we could get into that, but wherever the exhaustion is coming from, we'll set aside terminology for a minute. I think a lot of us have come to believe, myself included at least, that the way to recover when you're exhausted is to lie down and rest a lot. And that definitely has its place. Like no one loves a nap more than me. I'm big on like being still, daydreaming, not doing anything. But if you find that coming home after work and lying on the couch and like mindlessly scrolling your phone or watching, another episode of whatever show you're watching is not energizing you, it's not restoring you, that is just a clue that you might also need more active rest. And active rest is like go out with your friends, take the walk, go for the hike, dance, it might be really anything. We're all so different in that way. But sometimes when you're tired, the way you get your energy back is by doing things that we're going to maybe feel a little bit of resistance to doing because we're exhausted. But I think it's important because somewhere the messaging that a lot of us got was if you're really tired, like just do nothing and you will recover your energy by not expending any energy. And I've tested that out thoroughly and extensively in my life. And sometimes it is the most helpful thing is for me to take a day where I lie on the couch and I watch a lot of movies. But if that is my primary way of trying to recover, then I will find my mood and physical energy depleting further. And so again, like this idea of a hobby or an activity, relationships that really give you energy, like that is what will put gas in your tank to show up and do hard things day after day after day. So yeah, how do we figure out a way each week? It may not be every day in a big way, but maybe once a week, how are we taking a little time for ourselves? It's not easy to do. I mean, I really say this with a lot of understanding and respect for how much people have on their plates, whether that's having elderly parents elderly pets, young kids, our own chronic illnesses, having to work multiple jobs in order to pay the bill. So I'm not saying it in a light way. Like I get how hard that is to put something else in your schedule, but this is something that can really pay back in a big, big way. And so it's important to figure out what's a small thing. And I think if you're really at a point where you are so depleted that it makes you want to cry listening to me to say, go do something else, like that's so like heartbreakingly hard sounding, then it's about really finding little micro moments that give back to you. And so those are really small things that, help your nervous system to feel nice and safe and steady. It's stuff like staring out the window, looking at a bird feeder, or petting your cat without doing anything else, single tasking, really simple things, but with a lot of intention. Like I'm giving myself permission to do this, just small thing. Maybe for a parent, it's like letting yourself go to the bathroom alone, brushing your teeth without also doing anything else. Like those little things, when you're not doing any of them, going to the bathroom by yourself and petting your cat for 5 minutes without scrolling, those are big things that will add up over time and potentially help you to feel a little bit better, a little bit more recovered and restored. And who knows where that leads to. But I just want to be, I think, respectful of how hard so many people's daily lives are and how overwhelming it is. So if it feels impossible, you have to start even smaller than you ever imagined you could go. Like lower the bar further and further down until it's laughable, right? Like I'm going to pee by myself today. That's really important self-care if that's where you're at. And don't dismiss it or diminish that. But yeah, hopefully one day you can go spend a little time doing something fun for yourself.
Wait. People go to the toilet by themselves? Is that?
I don't have kids, but I hear this is what your experience is like. I mean, certainly.
There might be a chihuahua or a cat, but sometimes there's kids by yourselves.
I know.
Really? What?
I actually do feel bad when I really shut the bathroom door and I do not let any of my pets in there with me, but I do it. So, right, self-care is sometimes really practical. Lock the door. Don't let your dog join you in the shower. I have one that will.
And that thing that I've added recently, that micro step, is a moment in the day for gratitude specifically. And that moment is in the morning. I have a checklist of tasks that I have to get completed in the morning. And one of those is to open an app on my phone. And the app has places to put 3 things I'm grateful for. And then I close the app. But I do that every day. And that for me energizes me. But I'm curious, thinking about the listeners of this show, thinking about my experience with talking about this topic and thinking about how overwhelming it can be for people who don't have what we've just been talking about in their routine, in their schedule, in their lives at the moment. Maybe gratitude could be something you, the listener of this show, can implement in a way or a different way than I've talked about. But I'm just curious, Jessica, because I see gratitude in my own life having just this humongous impact if I can focus on it systematically. It feels weird saying that I have to systematically focus on gratitude, but when I do, I'm energized in a way that when I'm not focusing on gratitude is profoundly clear to me. And I've seen the impact for others as well. So with regards to everything we've been talking about today, how does gratitude fit in as a possible option for people who might be looking for a really small approximation to take after listening to them?
I think it's a really good choice in terms of the magnitude of the return. So off the top of my head, I cannot quote any of the research, but I do know that there is just libraries of research showing how effective gratitude is in terms of the positive impact that it has on many levels of our well-being. What I can speak to a little bit more is an exercise called What Went Well, or Three Good Things. Sometimes it's called Three Blessings. And I always recommend this to in my classes because this version of the exercise, and I'll explain it in a moment, has actually been shown to reduce burnout in nurses and increase compassion satisfaction levels. So that's the satisfaction we get out of doing our jobs well. And it also has lots of positive impact on mood and reducing depression, anxiety, that sort of thing. So Three Good Things is really intended to be done at the end of the day, preferably right before you go to bed. And you write down three things that went well, no matter how small, and what your role was in helping to make that thing happen. And so your role might have just been like, I paused long enough to notice that the birds were singing, or it could be, I made the choice to leave work on time. So I had the option to go to yoga after, or whatever it is. Can be small things, big things, but there's a huge impact on the way you start to function, because if you know that you're going to be doing this at the end of the day, you start to look for things all throughout your day that you will record at the end. And so it literally starts to shape your attention and focus throughout the day, noticing things that are going right, going well, which because of our negativity bias, we're not really picking up on. And I think the research is if you do this for 2 weeks or longer, that's where you start to see the big positive impacts, both professionally and personally. I've also read research where it shows that even like doing it for 3 days can have a positive impact. Anecdotally, I can tell you that many people have shared with me, because I do this as part of my classes, it's an assignment, they have to do it, that they start to fall asleep more easily because it's the last thing they're doing. So instead of running over all the things they feel like they failed at, all the things that went wrong, all of their worries, which activates your sympathetic nervous system, fight, flight, right? So that wakes you right up. You can't sleep if you're thinking that way. Instead of that, you're thinking about what went well. And you're often thinking about really meaningful connections that you have with people, nature, yourself. It's like these are really deeply meaningful things. Even the smallest things, I think are often kind of connected deeply to what we think of as meaningful in our lives. And this starts to generate positive emotions. And that relaxes us. It keeps us in a more parasympathetic state so we can fall asleep. And so many people tell me that this changed their relationship with sleep. And so many of us struggle with falling asleep if we're stressed. And so I would definitely recommend, if you have 5 minutes or less and you want to give something a try Three Good Things or What Went Well before you go to bed, particularly if you're struggling to sleep. See if that helps. See if you're really stuck in kind of like a negativity spiral, if you're feeling really hyper focused on what's going wrong. These are very depleting thought patterns or mindsets that we get stuck in. And I'm like a world-class negative thinker, complainer. So I say this with no judgment. I've had to learn to do this for myself. But it's very draining to always be, focused on what's wrong. Again, this is something that at one point was very adaptive and healthy. It kept us safe and alive to be focused on the problems. Now we're over focused on what's going wrong and the problems, and it's having negative consequences for us. So training being very intentional about searching for things that you will write down at the end of the day starts to have a profound impact on your relationship, often with work, without work having to change in any other way. You're just searching for the good, and that can radically reorganize how you're relating to the exact same circumstances. And so that's a very, very powerful practice to try to start giving yourself a boost, I think, mentally and emotionally, and even physically, if it's helping you with your sleep.
Well, I'm going to change when I'm filling out these 3 things in my app, and maybe I'll increase it to 6. I like focusing on things I'm grateful for. But 3 things that went well is, and I would like to offer, because this has been helpful to me, to our animal training contingency, a reframe of that to say 3 small approximations you took throughout the day to make progress, whether that's towards your goals or learning something that didn't go right so that you can make better decisions next time. I often find that's what I'm most grateful for. Oh, that didn't work. I'm smarter now. I hope. That's
a good way to put it.
But that's a challenging. Well, thank you for that. I'm gonna. If anyone's interested, I've been using this app called. And I by no means am endorsed. I'm no means affiliated with this app in any way, shape, or form. I just literally found it from a Google search. One called Happy Feed, which gives you a screen that has 3 boxes that you fill out and you can attach photos to. So you could actually, like with what you're saying, Jessica, take a photo in the moment when you're going throughout your day and then attach that photo to the thing that you fill out in this box. So Happy Feed is the app that I've been using. Well, thanks so much for sharing everything so far, Jessica. We love hearing about people's behavioral odysseys, and so we're grateful for you sharing everything you have done with us today. Can you, before we wrap up this episode, just bring us up to speed? What are you doing in 2023, and where can people go online to find out more and get in touch?
It's 2024.
Oh my God,
I'll forgive you that because we're only on week 2 of this. So you have like 6 months before you have to.
It isn't the first time, it won't be the last.
Right. We have months where we're still going to say 2023.
I'm smarter now because I just did that.
Right. You probably next episode won't do this. That's the learning curve.
We'll see. We'll see, everyone.
Yeah. Now maybe you'll do it just because. So I am really focused on supporting people who work in animal shelters, although I do work with wildlife rehab centers and sanctuaries and all kinds of other groups. But in 2024, I am launching an updated version of my platform, the Compassion in Balance program, which is really like a one-stop shop, an online hub of educational resources to support the welfare and well-being of people who work with animals. So it's a really meant to be an organizational tool to support workers around these issues so that they're not so clueless and overwhelmed the way I was. And so that's available. That's being beta tested right now and will be available in the spring. And so that's where I'm focusing. So compassioninbalance.com or jessicadolce.com is the best place to find out more.
Wonderful. And we will link to this in the show notes. And for anyone who is listening to this and has enjoyed what they've heard today and then decides to go on social media to try to find Jessica, they're not going to be successful, are they, Jess?
No, I left social media a few years ago. So you can find me, but my last post, I think, was at the end of 2020 saying goodbye. And so if you wanted to hear from me in real time, my newsletter is really the best way to hear my rambling thoughts about the world and find out what's coming up next. And so on either one of those websites, on jessicadolce.com, you can sign up for my newsletter. But yeah, you won't find me on any social platforms these days.
Awesome. Well, we'll link to all of that in the show note. Jessica, thank you so much for recording this episode with us. And we'll leave with some gratitude.
Thank you, Ryan.
And thank you as well so much for listening. This is your host, Ryan Cartlidge, signing off from this episode of the Animal Training Academy podcast show. It's our hope today's conversation sparked inspiration and added some tools to your trainer's toolbox. Remember, every training challenge is an approximation towards becoming a better trainer. Embrace the rough patches, learn from them, and keep improving. And don't forget, the path to growing your skills and expanding your knowledge continues beyond this episode. Visit www.atamember.com to to join our waitlist and be the first to know when our membership doors open again. There you'll find a supportive community of trainers just like you, working to make a positive difference in the lives of animals and humans alike. Until next time, keep honing your skills, stay resilient, and remember, every interaction with an animal or human learner is your opportunity to create ripples. We're here cheering you on every step of the way. See you at the next episode.